Hello everyone and welcome back. It's episode 2 of the third series of painting a Song of Ice and Fire tabletop game miniatures on this channel. In this series we're painting Ramsay Bolton, Great John Umber, and the Mountain That Rides, an actually immense little miniature, for one person on a horse as it were. In the last episode, we went ahead and we did all of the priming, including some zenithal highlighting, where we just applied a gray primer from above on the miniatures to give a bit of a gradual shading from the top. And you can see it on the miniatures here. They've got a little bit of definition in the recesses. That dark primer is still showing through. And on the highlighted areas, we see the light gray primer that we put on last. This is just going to help show through our inks as we put them on and give them a little bit of highlighting without us having to go in and do that highlighting manually. I don't know about you, but I don't have time to be doing all of my miniatures up to like a beautiful competition standard all the time, but I do like them to look like they got a bit of depth, and this is a quick way to cut out some time from the process. As you can see, I'm mixing together some yellow and some brown to start what, this entire episode is going to be about, which is to say painting the caparison and the tabard and all the yellow bits on the Mountain That Rides. It is genuinely a bit of a challenge. He's a huge miniature. It's not necessarily technically challenging, but certainly, for a single cavalryman, and let's be honest here, I don't particularly enjoy painting cavalry, and I'm sure many of you would agree painting horses can be a bit of a drag with the wide, smooth areas that you need to make interesting and everything, but at least he's got like caparison armor, all this kind of stuff that we can pick out. He's just really big. So if you're interested in watching the painting of Gregor Clegane on horseback, this is the episode for you. I'm going to try and chat a little bit about that process as we go along, but this is not going to be as heavily commented as some of my other episodes, of course, because there's just not that much to say. We're applying the yellow and brown mixture here across the entire miniature. I am going to mention why I'm using yellow and brown. I've mentioned it previously, but obviously not everyone has been watching every episode, I would expect. Although I do recommend, you take a look at anything that does interest you on the channel, and you let me know what you like so that I can keep making more of that. So, using yellow and brown here, the brown is basically going in to just sort of pull down the yellow. Yellow ink, in this case, I use inks for all of my coloring. Yellow ink and a lot of yellow paints sort of are highlighter yellow, like this cadmium yellow thing that's just really bright and looks a little unnatural. So adding in a little bit of brown just cuts that down. And I've also noticed that the brown ink settles into the recesses a little bit and makes the recesses look a little off-colored, but not just black, right? The real advantage of a lot of this is that our colors will settle in the recesses, and for most colors that are a little dark, that works for making the color look more intense where it should be shaded, and look a little thinner where it would be raised up and maybe better lit. With yellow, though, because it's a bright color, we get the same thing that we get with like white or other bright colors, which is to say the color pooling in a dark area actually makes that area look brighter instead of darker. You get this like really bright yellow down in the creases of the clothing, and that just doesn't make any sense. So mix in a little bit of brown, and what you'll get is it'll darken down in the crevices a little bit. You can see here I haven't mixed in quite as much brown to the tail end as maybe I could have, and it is starting to gather a little bit yellow, like bright yellow, and that's a really good example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to keep moving the ink around before it dries, nudging it around with my brush and making sure it actually settles where I want it to. You can see I'm trying to push it out of the crevices there and make sure the crevices stay dark and the raised areas actually get dyed yellow. I've just wiped off my brush on my thumb to make sure that my brush is a little dry and can absorb some of the excess yellow. Just nurse it a little bit. Yellow is a notoriously hard color to paint with, and it's no different with the inks. We do have the advantage that the ink just sort of dyes the surface a little bit and is easy to wipe away and nudge around, whereas paint just kind of goes on. And what I found is yellow paint as well, with this slight transparency, ends up looking really streaky. Unless you're doing lots of thin coats, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Mind-numbing stuff that. If you use ink, it just sort of flows and it settles down roughly even, as you can see, and just kind of looks okay, especially on a light primer like this. You can go a little bit darker, and in fact I would almost recommend you go a little bit darker, just so that the darkness really shows through in the creases, and you can get better shading out of your yellow. But overall, this yellow ink is going to work out better for you, or at least it worked out better for me than yellow acrylic really ever did. For a lot less effort anyway. And less effort is what I am all about. So we're going to be putting this yellow on across the entire surface of the miniature here. Not a whole lot more to say about that. Just take a look at this episode and watch how I push the yellow ink around and try to soak it out of recesses where I don't want it to be shaded. And I try to keep in mind the sort of light and dark, the play of light and dark, if you will, that I want to be reproducing on this miniature. Where I actually want to be dark, where I actually want to turn yellow. I want to make sure all of the areas have been evenly dyed so the yellow looks relatively even across the entire thing, while not looking perfectly uniform, because of course it is fabric and stuff like that. I'm also not being super careful as I apply it. The mountain that rides is not... he's not a complex man, and he's also not a complex miniature from the standpoint of coloring. It's not like I'm going to have a lot of bands of color where all of a sudden I've gotten yellow in one place and that's going to mess with my red later or something. I see him as being largely leather, metal, and this yellow that is his the color of his heraldry. And leather being brown, and metal, which I'm going to be base coating with black later on. Both can go very, very nicely over yellow with nary a trace of the yellow showing through. So, if I do go over the lines here or there with my yellow, I'm really not too concerned. I'm going to go back and I'm going to correct it later. Most important right now is getting that yellow to lay on bright, colorful, and evenly all over the miniature. Well, all over the areas, that are cloth, that is. If you do want to use the exact same materials as me, I am going to plug this now because I've got a decent amount of time. I have Amazon affiliate links in the description below. As an Amazon affiliate, I do earn on any qualifying purchases you make through those links, and that isn't just the item that it's linked to. If you've used Ebates or any of those referral services, it works similar to that. Click on the Amazon affiliate link, follow it through, and then if you shop around on Amazon in that same internet tab, my referral link or code should still be applied. So if you do make a purchase that qualifies, I will earn on that purchase as well. Of course, this is a pretty nice way to support the channel while getting something for yourself. You'll get, a normal retail priced item from Amazon. I get a little something for having referred it, and hopefully everybody wins from that process, and you've gotten something useful to you. I'll caveat, especially in the case of the painting materials here, and pretty much anything else you'd buy online, it's entirely possible that you can find it for a very reasonable price somewhere near to you where you don't have to pay shipping or any surcharges that would come from online shopping. So do check there first if you're looking for these art supplies. In my case, I purchased them from Michaels, which is a chain art store in Canada and I believe the United States, that often offers coupons. Those coupons can be, 20% off or whatever, or more often than that, can go all the way up to 50% off coupons in good sales. So if you're paying attention, you can do quite a lot of shopping for art supplies at Michaels. And while I would argue their prices normally on the shelf are a little high, their prices at 50% off are normally very, very reasonable, and definitely beat the pants off of online prices for a lot of those products. So keep that in mind. Shop local, especially for paintbrushes and stuff like that. I had a really good chance recently where a store near me was shutting down. They were having their retirement sale, so it was like 70% off a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things that was 70% off was actually paintbrushes, and nice ones, like the ones for like fine model building. You're actually going to see those in action pretty soon. Right now, going in the pipes, I've got a project where I'm going to be painting some 15mm miniatures. For those of you who aren't really like up on the wargaming sort of scales and stuff, the scales work by sort of measuring the height of eye of a character, as it were. So like the distance between their eyes and their soles of their feet. Some people do it to the top of their head, and it gets sort of fuzzy here and there because there's all sorts of manufacturers and whatever. But roughly, to help you picture it, a 15mm miniature is one that's about 1.5 centimeters tall. And I've got some 15mm historical miniatures for the Peloponnesian Wars, so an Athenian army and a Spartan army. Then I want to build up for De Bellis Antiquitatis. It's DBA, it's this historical rule set. Not super like simulation, but really, really quick to play, like incredibly quick to play. And a decent amount of fun, really. Throw down some really quick terrain, play a couple games, 2 or 3 back to back. It's great. I've got a couple of other armies made up for it in 6mm right now, so that's 1/2 centimeter tall guys, and it is a good time. I really enjoy it. So I wanted to get these guys together because I kind of like the Greek period. I do have a lot of plans to vary things up in the future. If you haven't taken a look at my Instagram, my Facebook yet, go check those out if you are interested in what I'm doing here and you're interested in sort of seeing more of what I'm doing in the future, or as it were, like the present, but the future relative to this episode, if that makes any sense. Some like Avengers Endgame time travel shenanigans going on, but no, go check it out. My Instagram, I post semi-regular updates of what I'm working on whenever I get the chance. Lately, I've been having some pretty big changes at work. Good changes, probably. But they have kept me busy, and they've kept me sort of highly engaged, which means I haven't been able to get the episodes that I want to do done, specifically the Let's Get Technical episode that should have come between En Bref and this series here. But I'll touch on that in a minute. Just finish plugging my social media here. On Instagram, I do post what I'm working on, probably about once a week, unless I'm away for work or otherwise occupied. You'll see an update of something I'm working on. And there's some pretty cool stuff there. It's not all A Song of Ice and Fire. I am trying to get A Song of Ice and Fire fully rolled out and fully painted up so that I can play a game of it this summer and maybe go for a battle report on the channel. If you guys are interested in battle reports, let me know. I love them on YouTube. It's just kind of fun to at least have one open in the background and watch some people banter and play a tabletop game. If you're into tabletop games, that's the stuff. So I'm going to be trying to make some of my own. Before I go on to talking about that Let's Get Technical episode I wanted to make, I'm just going to mention here in the background, I just threw some Flow Improver in with my mixture of yellow and brown. The Flow Improver is to improve the flow, as it were, of the ink. What I've been noticing is stuff's starting to dry up a little bit, and stuff's not really flowing into the creases as well as I'd like. I'm getting some bubbles and stuff. Flow Improver, what it does is it's sort of a paint thinner, insofar as like pretty much any fluid is a paint thinner, quote unquote. It'll make your paint thinner. Paint thinner is its own thing because it does something chemical. But like if you add water to your paint, you're changing the ratio of medium, which is the fluid that the pigment is suspended in, and the pigment itself. And the more medium you have, the thinner the color of the paint is. So I'm going to be thinning it a little bit with my Airbrush Flow Improver here, but the other more important thing it does is it breaks up the surface tension of your paint or ink. In this case, the surface tension of the paint or ink, as it were, is what impact it has is it'll help create bubbles, right? Because the surface tension, it holds it together even if there's air stuck underneath, so you get these bubbles. And it'll also create tide marks as it dries if it's not drying or it's not settling where you want it to. Tide marks are like if you have ever lived by the seaside and you've gotten drops of salty water on your boat or on your clothes or on your car, and you'll notice when it dries it leaves sort of a ring almost, because the surface tension holds the drop in a dome shape, and that dome holds the sediment, the particles inside it, which in the example of paint or ink would be the pigment itself, right, the color. It holds that at the surface or near the surface. So when it dries, you end up getting a whole bunch of that being deposited around the perimeter, and you get this tide mark, the tide line where the tide reached to, right? So with our paints and our inks, we want to avoid that as best we can, and Flow Improver can help do that. It just breaks up the surface tension. I use it almost exclusively when I'm thinning my paints and inks to just like apply like this, as you can see. But especially when I'm doing washes or something that I do need to apply more medium to, even still, I will mix it with water. I'll put a very small amount of ink, a lot of water, and then some Flow Improver, and all of that together gets me the consistency that I'm looking for out of my my wash. For example, like a dark wash. I've started doing some dark washes to put on top of metal areas when their recesses don't end up shaded enough. So that's sort of the formula I use: a drop or two of black ink, a bunch of water, some flow improver until I get the right consistency. Now I wanted to talk about that Let's Get Technical episode. Yeah, Let's Get Technical. I'm trying to make like an episode that's also just like a general technical expertise in miniature painting themed episode in between each series or whatever of actual real-time painting tutorials, because again, that's what I kind of find useful. And for me as well, I only really started getting back into miniature painting quote unquote seriously in the last year and a bit. So these are also opportunities for me to sort of performance check my own knowledge, as it were, and see if, like they say, if you actually know something, you should know it well enough to instruct on it or teach on it. So I'm going to be doing these ones. The next one is going to be an overview of the Badger Patriot 105 airbrush, which is the airbrush I use. It's a pretty basic one, like bog standard. The mechanism for it is what you can expect to see roughly in pretty much any gravity-fed ordinary airbrush. So me going over how to strip it, maintain it, clean it, like any other tool that you might use at work, I think is a pretty good idea for both my own expertise and for any of you who are considering getting an airbrush. I do recommend it. If you can possibly do it, get an air compressor, get an airbrush. It really is invaluable for stuff like the priming and varnishing in particular. So yeah, the episode will be this little 15 minutes, mini documentary where I'm gonna break the thing apart. I'm gonna talk about the different parts. I'm gonna talk about the actual like mechanism by which it delivers paint to your target, and I'm gonna show you how I work it. It's not gonna be anything crazy in depth because again, I'm learning as I go as well. But it should be just enough to get you into using an airbrush and get you comfortable with it, get you understanding the controls and everything. So hopefully I can get that out sometime soon. Like I said, that'll be around work and everything else, and it is one of my priorities though for the summer. In the summer months, hopefully things they'll either quiet down or they'll get worse. Worse, busier at work, and that's pretty unpredictable right now. But yeah, we'll see. Burn that bridge when we get to it, kind of thing. As I also mentioned, I'm trying to get some battle reports done. I've been working on terrain for those battle reports lately. Terrain was never really my thing. I was one of those guys who long ago, when I first got interested in miniatures, I would play with like Mega Blocks and Legos and Kleenex boxes for my terrain. So it wasn't really something I had experience in. At the very least, I had painted a couple of models. I haven't really done a lot of buildings and stuff like that. I have some MDF kits that I want to paint up or build up or customize or that kind of stuff to use. I've also gotten a Killing Fields battle mat. It's like teddy bear fur. It's super cool. It just came in the mail today. Super excited for that. I hope it looks good on camera and everything, but it looks super good in person. I'm also trying to figure out how to make trees, like realistic trees. I've seen a whole bunch of tutorials on making trees online. I've seen a whole bunch of like pre-made trees that you can buy for like railroad kits and stuff. And I don't really like the look of them. Like they're armatures with sponge on them, meant to look like trees, and they look like armatures with sponge on them. Like, it's fine, and I would be totally content to use them, but I want to experiment and try all my options beforehand. And if I find something really good, I'm going to show it here, because terrain is sort of a really daunting prospect. I can certainly say that based on being daunted by it right now. And I'd love to share any knowledge I get on that, just like I'm trying to do with miniatures themselves, with you guys. With all that being said, if any of that sparked your interest, if you do go to my Instagram, my Facebook, and get a hold of me and throw some comments there, I'd love to see them. I'd love to see comments here if you got anything you want to say, if you want to correct me on something I did in the video while I was painting yellow for 15 minutes, or anything else like questions, comments, queries. Fair ball, I'd love to see it. I really appreciate you guys' participation. I actually just hit 100 followers on Instagram. That's crazy. Thank you so much to anyone out there who's also subscribed to me on Instagram. And yeah, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or learned something, and go play some games.